Hello, and welcome to this special recorded event, Decision 2024, Your Voices, Your Future. My name is Tom Guevara. I'm director of the IU Public Policy Institute, and I'll be your host as we hear from the three candidates vying to be elected as Indiana's next governor. It's an incredible honor to moderate such a critical discussion about the future of our state. Much of the work and thanks go to the staff of the IU Public Policy Institute and the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs for making this event possible. This is the fourth time our institute, which is part of the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs, has hosted this forum, and I am pleased to participate in the conversation. I also would like to thank the Herron School of Art and Design for allowing us to record this forum in their beautiful school. I'm here because I'm a Hoosier who wants to see Indiana thrive in every way possible. In fact, all three of our guests share this desire for our state. I would like to thank our candidates, former Indiana Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. Jennifer McCormick, U.S. Senator Mike Braun, and Mr. Donald Rainwater for their participation and ideas. Many critical questions and issues will be raised during my discussion with the candidates. Public discourse is one of America's most proud traditions, and I am so pleased that you are joining us to hear from our candidates. Each candidate will be with me individually for approximately 1/2 hour without the usual trappings of partisan elections. This is not a debate, but rather a discussion about their vision for our state. Earlier this year, the Public Policy Institute embarked on a process of drafting a series of policy briefs that cover critical topics that impact Hoosiers on a daily basis. I will be speaking with the candidates on a number of these important issues, including but not limited to childcare and healthcare, workforce development, innovation and technology, and community resiliency. I'll be asking questions that have been derived from this work, with the advice of faculty members and students at the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs in Indianapolis and Bloomington, as well as expert authors who have collaborated with us. With the 24-hour news cycle and social media at everyone's fingertips, it can be easy to focus on headlines and not substance. This forum is designed to be different. The goal will be to proceed in a conversational tone with the spirit of open inquiry, in keeping with the mission of the Public Policy Institute. We will hear from the next governor of Indiana on important issues that we all hear about regularly and the Policy Institute studies every day. I look forward to a spirited discussion about the future of our state, and I appreciate you being here to be part of the conversation. I'm pleased to welcome the Democratic nominee for Governor of Indiana and former Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. Jennifer McCormick. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
During the last 3 years, the Gallup organization has reported a large decrease in the public's confidence in our most important federal government institutions. While Indiana state government may not face quite the same loss of confidence as federal institutions, it also is likely not immune to it. What do you think can be done to raise Hoosiers' confidence that our state government can effectively address their needs?
Yeah, so as I travel across the state, I hear it a lot more than people probably would assume I would hear it. And a lot of data we see shows that 60% of Hoosiers don't like the direction in which the state is going, and a lot of that is because of their loss of trust. So our concern is when you have one party rule for so long that no one's real great at policing themselves, and there's really not a reason to do that or an appetite to do that. So we released the McCormick-Gooden Common Sense Ethics Plan, where it was our promise to Hoosiers to deliver a government that is transparent, held accountable, that we put 6 different mechanisms in place that would establish ways in which the government would be responsible and be a good government. So that governing body, just bringing back that confidence, was important for us. You know, when I was state superintendent, I took that very seriously. I mean, I was elected by the people, I was serving the people, and so we held the Department of Education to really high standards, and we were very proud of that. And I intend to do the same thing once elected. I am hopeful that our General Assembly would pick up on a lot of our ethics plan, because some of that would need their help. But it's really hard, I would think, as General Assembly members to say, no, we don't want to be held to high standards, because that's what it's going to take to bring back that trust, and we're going to work really hard to do that.
Economic research shows small and new businesses create most new jobs. In 2022, the Indiana Community Action Poverty Institute found low-wage jobs dominate in rural areas. Although not a universal solution, entrepreneurship can lead to more jobs, lower income inequality, and build wealthier communities. What policies or programs can we implement or support to help Hoosiers who want to start a business?
Yeah, so the fastest growing jobs in Indiana require less than a high school diploma. And that is not sustainable for a state that wants a strong economy, and we want to keep our most talented workforce here. We want to have folks start families in our state and stay here as retirees. So that's not sustainable. So making sure that we're taking care of small business, which is our engine, and I would also say there are a lot of great grant programs that are working. Those that are working, maintain those and build upon those. Those that are not, or that are not in existence, that's where we need to bring those small businesses to the table to make sure we're asking them, what are your needs? What are the resources you need? What are those mentorship programs? What are the startup grants that you need? What are those tax incentives that we could do? And we have some of that in place, but not to the degree I feel like it is that we need. So when I left the state superintendent, I started my own business. And I tell you, no one really gives you this is how you do it. And so I sought out a lot of opinions and a lot of help, but we got to make it easier than that for folks who want to start a small business and be successful, and not just the startup, but maintaining it. I was thrilled to hear the Harris Walls team come out and say that they were going to offer huge tax incentives to people who are wanting to start small businesses. And I think that's a good thing, but as a state, we can do the same and also be good partners with a lot of people who I think really are ready to move the needle, not just for all small business, but also an emphasis on women and minorities with small businesses.
Evidence shows that technological innovation elevates wages and incomes and our overall standard of living. Indiana has a large manufacturing industry that employs about 20% of our state's workforce, but innovation and technological advancement in manufacturing is lagging, particularly in rural areas. What can we do to increase opportunities for Hoosiers to work with artificial intelligence and in tech-intensive advanced manufacturing?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate to have the manufacturing in Indiana, and we got to maintain that and grow that. But you need an educated and healthy workforce, and we need an educated and healthy consumer, and we have to have that talent base be what it needs to be. So that means that starts really early. So that starts in childcare, it starts in universal pre-K, K-12, and post-high school. Right now, Indiana is putting forth a plan that would really put into question the talent that we would have to pull from. When you're saying get an 8th grade education and you're good to fill those, less than high school diploma jobs, that is just really a pathway to poverty for many of our Hoosiers. So we push the rigor. We push a really great academic piece of it. That's my background. We're over half of the state budget, but we need to make sure that we have an educated and talented workforce. On the other end of that, things are moving with artificial intelligence, and I think there's so much opportunity there. Now, will there be struggles? Absolutely. Will there be barriers? Absolutely. But we have great institutions, we have great partners who can walk us through those struggles, those opportunities, and educate folks on how to best take advantage of that and prevent some of the barriers, but also too, doing a better job of what's that return on investment, because the opportunity is there in so many different pockets. So we just need to make sure that we have that educated and healthy workforce, but also embrace the technologies that's there and go after, again, a lot of that takes dollars. I know IEDC has put forth some grants in that space, and continue what's working and build upon those which are working, but it's the future, and Indiana needs to embrace it to move forward.
Indiana's maternal and infant mortality rate has exceeded the national average since at least the 1990s. For every 1,000 births in 2022, 7 infants died before their first birthday, putting Indiana at the 7th highest position for infant mortality in the nation. Rural Hoosiers and Hoosiers of color, in particular, experience inadequate maternal and infant health care due to a lack of physicians, hospitals, and specialty services. How can we improve Indiana's maternal and infant health outcomes while also reducing racial and geographic disparities?
So we have to have a great healthcare system, and we are fortunate to have some of that in place. The expense of it and the access is a huge concern because we've developed, and this is no secret, a monopoly in our healthcare system. So the competitive, more rural areas, clinic type of feelings, those have all closed down. Many of them have. In some of our rural areas are areas where our brown and our black, a lot of brown and black Hoosiers live. And so in some of those communities, they don't have access to quality care. A third of our counties do not have an OBGYN, and that plays right into those statistics that you just shared and is a direct feeder into that problem. We also must embrace aggressive programs and education to help families plan and help get the resources they want to prevent unwanted pregnancies or to assist if you're with family planning. And so there's a whole lot of layers to that, but as a state, we also have to quit beating up our physicians and putting them in really horrible situations where they're not sure what they can practice and what they can't practice, and are there going to be legal ramifications? And it really does not incentivize the most talented to come to Indiana or to stay in Indiana, so we're feeling that. We certainly have a shortage in that space across the board, but that goes back to we need to have the most talented individuals stay in Indiana, and we want them to work here and be part of our communities. The other piece of that for our infants is we have 25% of our counties that do not have pediatricians. And the scary part of that is when I go into communities, sometimes I hear like, what's a pediatrician or what is an OBGYN? And if you don't know what those are, you've never been to those or you've never had the opportunity to take advantage of those. So it's access, it's making sure that it's affordable, it's making sure that we have the transportation in place to get people where they need to go for that health care, and making sure they're educated on what is out there and what's available and how do we get it to Hoosiers. It is a huge problem at a time where we're one of the third highest cost in health care, and how do we get those costs down but also increase access for all Hoosiers?
So let's turn to housing. Indiana has a deficit of nearly 140,000 affordable and available rental homes, with only 34 units available for every 100 of the lowest income households, the second lowest rate in the Midwest. Additionally, in the last year alone, Indiana had nearly 71,000 eviction filings, nearly 1 in 10 Hoosier renter households. What investments are needed, and as governor, what strategies would you employ to make housing more affordable in our state?
Yeah, well, in Indiana, in particular Indianapolis, has one of the poorest renter protection policies and practices in the nation. And that doesn't happen overnight. So working with our local levels to hold folks accountable, but also what can we do from the state lens to work with our local leaders to make sure our renters are protected. We also know too, there needs to be an incentive to build and to construct affordable housing. And I come from Henry County, and I was just talking to a builder not too long ago, and they were so excited to come to Henry County, and there's a lot of poverty in Henry County, and they were telling me they were building affordable housing, which we need and we welcome. And I said, where is it? And when they explained it to me, it was in a housing area that I'm like, I'm not sure that's affordable. And I said, what do you deem affordable? How are you defining affordability? And it was around 350,000. And I said, I'm not sure that's affordable, but walk me through that. So making sure we're talking about apples to apples and making sure we're taking care of those folks who need that housing, making sure we have fair lending practices and incentives to get people into homes that want to get into homes. I mean, there's just a whole lot that needs to be addressed, but we cannot do it alone at the State House. We need to have our local partners. We also need to look at other states that they have. It's a national issue, but there are some states that are seeing some movement with some great programs that let's steal from some of those great programs, their ideas, and let's build upon those, and things that maybe they've tried that didn't work, let's stay away from that, or maybe we need to tweak that. But this is definitely a space as we travel that we need to make sure that we are addressing. The other thing that I want to mention in our property tax relief plan, part of that was to keep people in their homes that are trying to stay in their homes, whether it's poverty or whether it's our senior citizens who are on fixed incomes. So having some of those tax breaks to free up some of those dollars to address some of that property tax issue is huge. So there are common sense ways to approach it, and we're willing to do that, but we can't do it alone from the governor's office, and we would need partnerships.
According to the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority Housing Dashboard, the homeownership rate for Black Hoosiers was 38% in 2022, compared to 75% for white Hoosiers. Black Hoosiers have been the only racial group to experience a decline in their homeownership rate since 2012, due, in part, to past discriminatory practices and policies. As governor, what steps would you take to increase homeownership opportunities, especially for Black Hoosiers?
Well, first is to address those policies. It doesn't happen by itself, and it's allowed to continue, and that's a policy issue. So again, some of it's at the state level, some of it's at the local level, and so addressing that where it is, we address it as an issue, and we don't shy away from having that discussion, but something has to happen, and that means a change of leadership. We're not going to change minds. We have to change the leaders. And so for us, it's about bringing common sense solutions, but that first step is to review the policies, address the policies, and work with, there are a lot of partners right now who are trying to do great work in that space, but we need to bring them to the table, and not just say we're bringing them to the table during a campaign, but bringing them actually to the table and throughout a term while you're in office, so that they're continually a voice. I wouldn't say that discriminatory practice is only happening in the housing piece of it, though. We see it in education, we see it in healthcare, and so let's have that discussion as a state. And I know it's a difficult discussion, but it is past overdue.
So let's talk a little bit about childcare. The first 5 years of a child's life are critical for brain development of our young Hoosiers. Research shows that access to affordable, quality childcare can enable more people to work. To set the stage for Hoosier children's future educational success, how should families' access to high-quality care and learning opportunities be expanded?
Yeah, it is critical for our workforce, to just the family dynamics, to the success of the child coming into school with school readiness. I mean, there's so many layers of what an amazing investment. And I know in Indiana we shy away from it because of the expense, but study after study has proven that you get that money back in fourfold. And so we have got to approach that differently as far as what an amazing investment. COVID did not help in this space. So right now we still have a third of our counties that do not have access to affordable, quality childcare, and that is unacceptable. We are in 2024, unacceptable. We're getting ready to turn over into 2025, and we still have so many of our families, even if they want to work, they don't have a safe place to take their children, or they can't afford it. It's cheaper to stay home than to go get a job because our wages aren't moving. And so there's a lot of pieces to that need to be addressed, and you have to have good, educated, specialized workers in that space. So dealing with a 3-year-old is different than when I taught 12-year-olds. It's just different. And so making sure that we are incentivizing programs to develop that workforce that would take care of our child care. The other piece of that is, we still don't have universal pre-K that fits right in that space of that 0 to 5, and it's so incredibly important. We have kids coming into kindergarten, because remember, Indiana doesn't require kindergarten until they're 7. So we have kids coming into kindergarten in many of our districts that don't know colors from shapes, from numbers. I know I was in an affluent district in between Anderson University and Ball State University as a local superintendent. In kindergarten roundup, we'd have kids come in and they would not be potty trained, and so we're ready for kindergarten, and we're expecting kids to, 2 kids that need potty trained in a classroom of 25, and you're moving on to the academic piece of it. So there is a huge need for it. The other piece I don't think we're talking about is that 0 to 3 language development. In the state of Indiana, we've got a long way to go for that 0 to 3 development as far as expressive language. Are they able to express appropriately, which I know at that age that's different, but it is still expressive language. And then receptive language. Are they being read to? Are they being talked to? And if you watch, go to a grocery store, go to a restaurant, parents are on their cell phone, or they hand the cell phone to their infant, or the iPad, and it's that language barrier that we're seeing. And we're not alone, but where is that discussion? Because we can spend a ton of money on lots of great programs in K-12, but if we don't take care of the readiness space in 0-5, like other states are doing, we're going to be lagging. So let's be smart about it and invest with our tax dollars where they need to be invested, so we're saving on the other end. We have a stronger workforce, we have better school readiness, we have a better economy with people being able to work. There's so many benefits to it.
As in the rest of the country, Hoosiers are experiencing the ever larger effects of a changing climate, including more extreme and frequent weather events. Multiple surveys have found that most Hoosiers, regardless of political party, support policies that help address climate change and do more to develop alternative energy sources. What policies do you think are needed to address climate change?
Yeah, there's a whole lot that we haven't done in Indiana that needs to be done. And these aren't radical, these are very common sense. We are one of 11 states that's not a part of the Climate Alliance. That is bipartisan with governors. So day one, do our homework and how do we become a member of the Climate Alliance? Because we're not in isolation. So we need to do this in partnership with our neighboring states and the world. So Climate Alliance would be the first thing. The other piece of that is right now we're at a huge time where our water is at risk, our soil's being compromised. You know, our air, I come from a 5th generation farm family. My dad was a soil water conservationist. My husband was in water quality before he became a science teacher. I mean, there's a whole lot of layers to what we need to take care of, but we still don't have a water management plan. And I bring that up because it's all interconnected. We need to take care of that because of our, you know, our wetlands that are very, very connected to our concerns with what's happening with our climate. And we have wiped those pretty much away in the state of Indiana. Very, very, very nearsighted. So long term, we need to have a plan. We need to protect our natural resources. We need to make sure we're part of Climate Alliance. We need to make sure we're transitioning to greener, smarter energy, which I think there's a big appetite for. We just have to have those incentives, whether it's dollars or whether the private partnership is there, that there are a lot of people willing to go, but you have to have leaders who also embrace that and understand that. A perfect example I can give you is, again, when I was in charge of half of the state budget at the Department of Education, we worked closely with Purdue University on their Climate Research Center, and we brought tons of resources for K-12 so that people would be educated, including those who were trying to teach about it and then the kids in which we were trying to teach. And we had great response from that. And once we left office, all that came down. And we had people reach out and say, where did that go? We were using it to teach kids about the power of, you know, being smart with our energy and, you know, water usage and the wetlands. And, you know, that's just a reflection of you either are trying to solve and be a part of the solution or you're trying to run away from it. And in this time, we're done with that. We have to change the leaders.
According to federal reporting, only 37% of all Indiana schools met or exceeded expectations during the 2022-2023 academic year. Recent state assessments also revealed that only 30% of students were proficient in math and English language arts. What should we do to improve equitable education outcomes for students across the state?
Yeah, my first question would be on the assessment piece. I think when we're hanging our hat on assessments and percentages of pass, not passing, those who took it, those who did not, attendance, you know, all the percentages we're hanging our hat on, that we're not comparing apples to oranges. So Indiana is really good about changing our assessment every few years. So we have standards set, we continue to change those, then we continue to change the assessment. So we don't have good trend data. We don't have good trend data at the individual level. We don't have good on the student. We don't have good trend data as a school or as a state. So our charge when we were in the office said, quit changing, pick one and stick to it so we really know that trend data. At the local level, the schools have done that. So we're really assessing heavily because we have more faith in continuing to have that trend data. At the state level, there's such pressure and an appetite to continue to change that at the tune of $40 to $60 million every time we do it, but it also causes confusion. It makes public schools look bad, and my charge is at the end of the day, I mean, I think sometimes that checks a box for them, but it's unfortunate because we know we have room to grow in K-12. We know we need to increase our writing skills, our literacy, we need to increase our math skills, basic computation is a huge concern. We know where those concerns lie. We need good data to make informed decisions. Then we also need research-based instructional programs and approaches that are well received and well spread across the state of Indiana. We have also not done a good job with that because too many times we are controlled on what can be done based on a national organization from here has given us a lot of money in the state of Indiana to be the the experimental state, and we've jumped all over that. So our kids have been an experiment for 20 years, and it is time to get back to what works, what's research-based, what assessments are reliable and valid. I mean, we're not asking for the moon here. We're asking for just best practices, but it is concerning. But I feel like we really don't know where our kids are performing because we keep changing the assessment and the bar, and the standards in which they're assessed. Sometimes too, those standards that we're teaching aren't aligned to the assessment, and so that also becomes a problem.
Nearly 1 in 12 Hoosiers meet the criteria for having a substance use disorder. Access to early intervention and treatment services not only saves lives, but also reduces the economic impact of addiction on the individual and the community. What can your administration do to ensure those individuals have continued access to necessary recovery and treatment services?
Yeah, I have to give credit where credit's due on this one. Governor Holcomb, I was a member of the governor's workforce cabinet, and they did talk about substance abuse a lot, and they were trying to develop some programs to better serve Hoosiers. So I want to make sure that credit's given, and where those programs are working, let's keep those working and expand upon those. Where they're not working and where they're not reaching, we need to reach. So access is huge. Having the care providers that we need, which I know they struggled with as well, enticing people to come into our state or stay in our state, making sure that pipeline of caregivers in that area is where it needs to be. It's super expensive. I believe in the last 15 years, we've spent about $46 billion on just the substance abuse piece of it. And so we obviously need to make sure we're being smart about the commissions and the boards that we bring to the table to have those discussions. What are the gaps in care? I'm also very concerned about what I've learned about those who are incarcerated, and once they get released into communities, that reentry is difficult for many of them, and that is a huge chunk of some of the areas that we're seeing a lot of problems. We need a strong workforce, but we need healthy Hoosiers as well, and all that gets tied together. And substance abuse, it's just really been a huge crisis in the state of Indiana, and so making sure we're being good partners, bringing the right people to the table, putting the resources in that we need. But again, you can't do that in isolation because there are a lot of individual pockets of programs going on out in Indiana. And let's build upon what's working and let's fix what's not working. The mental health space of all that is very concerning. We're high in suicide attempts. We're high in actual suicides. As a local superintendent, as an educator, I dealt with that in the kids space or in their families, and it's horrible. And Indiana's been top 5 worst for some time now. And so we need to put the resources where they need to be and have a conversation. I know we shy away from that at the General Assembly because I've been in those conversations, but it's time we move into those conversations and put the resources where we need them.
Indianapolis has the 5th highest imprisonment rate in the nation for Black men born to low-income families. Researchers have found that racial disparities in the Indianapolis criminal justice system are a leading cause. What should be the top priority in addressing racial disparities in the Indiana justice system, and what will your administration do to implement policies to reduce them?
Yeah, first it's having a good handle on not just Indianapolis, but the state of Indiana. It's also making sure that we are appointing people that play a huge role in that are competent, that have character, and who are committed to that public service. One of those would be the Indiana State Police Superintendent, who has a huge role in this. And then working with our local officials that also have a huge role in this. So it is a problem. There are a lot of great programs like the Second Solution programs where you're reviewing those sentences and seeing if those longer sentences could then be, taken down. It's a matter of looking at the biases within the programs and do we see trends in that? And so there's a lot that can be done, but you also, again, it goes back to a state that is willing to have honest conversations at the table and then address it appropriately. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's going to take, again, state and local and also federal to see what programs out there that are doing a good job in other states as well and learn from those.
Good. Well, let's wrap up with one last question about young voter engagement. Indiana is historically among the bottom states in voter participation, particularly for young voters. Has your campaign engaged young voters during this election cycle, and what can be done to increase voting in our elections?
We have. It's not easy, so I'm not going to sit and pretend it is easy. We are 50 out of 50th on voter turnout, so we even have those who are registered that just don't go vote. Part of that is, I believe, when you have a supermajority for as long as we've had it, a lot of people are like, what's the point? We're very gerrymandered, so then I hear people in communities say, what's the point? Sometimes there's no one to vote for on the ballot in their political affiliations, so again, what's the point? And so too many of those end up that we're 50 out of 50th. We've also made it very difficult at the State House, where they continue to make it harder and harder to vote. And we just went through that the last session with transportation. So we can't get any further down, but it's still a huge problem. But the young voters are hard to reach, and many of them are exhausted by what they see in politics. They do not like the extremism. They do not like the divisiveness. They do not like the lack of willingness to be bipartisan. They don't like it. And so they're telling us, like, we don't want any part of that because we don't like it. And so we've tried to reach them through mechanisms, whether it's their social media platforms such as TikTok, which we're doing the right way, but that's been a huge reach for us. Finding leaders, young leaders that have a reach and are influencers has been empowering for us. Getting people to have their own mini campaigns for us has been very impactful in that age, but also giving them a reason of how this impacts your life. I mean, we tell them it's the choice is clear. I mean, do you want your own family planning and control over your body, or do you want the government to do that for you? I mean, the choice is clear, and especially the birth control conversation gets a lot of young kids coming up for air when I'm like, the bill's written, do you want to save your birth control or not? You know, that's always interesting. The cost of housing, their cost of education, they're like, I'll never be able to afford a house. And I'm like, that is your vote. You know, or I hear, you know, that my education, I'm in debt forever. That is your vote. And so having conversations with them, getting into their communities, but also just reminding them of why that importance is there, and that if we don't exercise that right to vote, we could likely lose that right to vote. And so I know sometimes it seems so, you know, just so absent from what they're thinking about, but, you know, trying to make those connections. And I love talking to our young people. I mean, part of that is my background, but I also learn so much from them as far as what that generation and their generations are feeling and the responsibility to that. So we're working hard in that space, but it's not easy. So I'm not going to sit and say we've figured it all out, but they're phone banking for us, they're door knocking for us, they're giving me $5 when they can and $20 when they can, which I am very humbled by. But, you know, we continue to work with them to say what works, what doesn't work, and get into that space. You know, universities are huge. So we've been talking to folks on the university campuses, but also getting into neighborhoods where kids have a lot to say, young people have a lot to say, so we need to be good listeners.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and
Thank
we
you.
certainly wish you the best of luck with the rest of your campaign.
Thank you. I so appreciate this opportunity.
Please welcome the Republican nominee for governor, U.S. Senator Mike Braun. Senator, thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
So let's go ahead and begin. Let's talk first about public institutions. During the last 3 years, the Gallup organization has reported a large decrease in the public's confidence in our most important federal government institutions. While Indiana state government may not face quite the same loss of confidence as federal institutions, it also is likely not immune to it. What do you think can be done to raise Hoosiers' confidence that our state government can effectively address their needs?
So let's talk about the national scene first. I've been there 5.5 years, and that definitely, I think, is valid to wonder what's happening there, from the basic functionality day to day to, you know, the fact that many folks have wondering, can it be fixed? I think it's a lot different. I spent 3 years in our state legislature and didn't sense any of that back in 15, 16, and 17. The real, I think, solutions to a lot of the issues we deal with there, which are contentious, ideological, hard to get 60 senators to agree on anything. Here it's a simple majority, so you don't have to cross that threshold. And you're talking about more kitchen table stuff. I went there hoping to weigh in on healthcare, reformed it in my own business many years ago, education, the two issues that, if nothing else is going on, most important to families. A lot of that is done at the state level. Healthcare has evolved to where there's a big national presence. You look at the other things I hear about, affordable housing, childcare, rural broadband, now cost of electricity the availability of it, and of course water. So those are issues that get a lot more to where you take away a lot of where the institutions are more about getting things done. Out there, it's a different dynamic.
Economic research shows small and new businesses create most new jobs. In 2022, the Indiana Community Action Poverty Institute found low-wage jobs dominate in rural areas. Although not a universal solution, entrepreneurship can lead to more jobs, lower income inequality, and build wealthier communities. What policies or programs can we implement or support to help Hoosiers who want to start a business?
Well, I didn't know I was one of them, an entrepreneur, until I decided not to go to Wall Street many, many years ago, because finance was my cup of tea. I was then had to make a decision, well, what do you do if you want to start your own business? Well, my wife kind of made that for me. She wanted her own store, originally a clothing store, until one of her friends started about the 7th or 8th one in a town of 8,000. We come from a big Catholic community. Remember, we almost needed a U-Haul to haul home our wedding presents. So she opened up a home accessory and gift store. It's been her only job, is that store, 505 Main Street, half block south of the courthouse. So we lived that. We know what it can do. It's a blue collar job mostly because it's your main source of income. Most often you don't scale it into a larger enterprise, but it's the heartbeat of the country. It's what we were founded upon. And I remember when I worked for our local kitchen cabinet company for 3 years, but was still so anxious, the guy wanted me to hang around and maybe run it someday. I went to the first place. It was a wobbly enterprise. It sold mostly to farmers, and it was survival mode for 3 to 4 years. That was 6 months before the farm crisis. I learned more there than I did getting a fancy MBA. Small business and finding a way to help them, entrepreneurs, fertilizes a broad field. It does it across the state, and it would beg the question, do we need to spend more time there versus on trying to, hook the whales that everyone's looking at? And that would be kind of a part of what we've done recently. I think you need to do some of that. But I come from Main Street. That's where I built my enterprise. It grew to a regional and then national company. Blessed 3 of our 4 kids run it now. That's the American dream. So I'll know what to do there to help Main Street, small businesses, entrepreneurs.
Evidence shows that technological innovation elevates wages and incomes and our overall standard of living. Indiana has a large manufacturing industry that employs about 20% of our state's workforce. But innovation and technological advancement in manufacturing is lagging, particularly in rural areas. What can we do to increase opportunities for Hoosiers to work with artificial intelligence and in tech-intensive advanced manufacturing?
So that's interesting because I mentioned that hard scrabble business. We had roughly 20 employees for 17 years. I can tell you that we, I think, upgraded to Radio Shack. At the end of that 17-year spread, it was mostly manual on documents, on accounting, everything. And when finally I knew I had a scalable business in 2 pretty mundane, low-margin areas of trucking, which is logistics, warehousing, distribution, the fancy names for it, between 98 and 08, we had to upgrade. And I constantly complained about the cost of it, and it changed every 3 years until our current chief technology officer, my older son, who was trained by my younger brother, convinced me. And of our 1,500 employees now across the country, this will surprise you, 50 of them are custom coders. That's a lot. And we built from jumping from Radio Shack to Great Plains, crafted a unique system, and it's probably doubled or tripled the profit margin. It's been the reason we've been able to grow the business. And now you've got things like AI. Government is totally underutilizing technology. It's probably worse in DC than it is even here, not to mention that it's now the way of life. You look at rural broadband. If you don't have high-speed internet in every nook and cranny in our state, we're going to see that the counties that are flat or losing population will continue to do it. So technology, especially high-speed internet, is important. And again, we're doing okay there, but we can do better.
Indiana's maternal and infant mortality rate has exceeded the national average since at least the 1990s. For every 1,000 births in 2022, 7 infants died before their first birthday, putting Indiana at the 7th highest position for infant mortality in the nation. Rural Hoosiers and Hoosiers of color, in particular, experience inadequate maternal and infant health care due to a lack of physicians, hospitals, and specialty services. How can we improve Indiana's maternal and infant health outcomes while also reducing racial and geographic disparities?
That is a shameful statistic, and especially when you juxtapose it to having some of the highest healthcare costs in the country. Probably the proudest thing I've done in business or politics would be taking on cost of healthcare back in '08. We did that before the law required you to cover pre-existing conditions. I was sick and tired of hearing how lucky our business was. It's only going up 5 to 10%. When healthcare costs that much, it's going to be less available to everyone. Everyone deserves it, regardless of ethnicity, station in life. I think the other side of the aisle owns that issue. We were flat-footed when we didn't have any alternative to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. We were defending a broken system. I intend to take that on as our next governor, and if you get it right, where it's based upon prevention, remediation, generally getting better ways that we actually run our own lives to keep ourselves healthy, and then not demand expensive, immediate remediation, you'll actually get at the roots of things like infant and maternal mortality. So it generally doesn't get addressed at the state level because one part of the spectrum wants the federal government to do it all. That's not a solution when we're going broke there. Our side thinks there's nothing wrong, and I know it can be improved. So that's taking on the biggest industry in our state. It's approaching now 20% of our GDP. Back when I wrestled with it, it was closer to probably 10. So something's got to give. And if we're a state, again, that you want to want your own kids to move back to, you can't have a statistic like that. I was glad to see that in the last session, we took a step towards acknowledging it. Then we got to be entrepreneurial because it's in a context of a really expensive, clumsy delivery system, and I need to get big healthcare to come the way of making that more doable.
So let's turn to housing. Indiana has a deficit of nearly 140,000 affordable and available rental homes, with only 34 units available for every 100 of the lowest income households, the second lowest rate in the Midwest. Additionally, in the last year alone, Indiana had nearly 71,000 eviction filings, nearly 1 in 10 Hoosier renter households. What investments are needed, and as governor, what strategies would you employ to make housing more affordable in our state?
So affordable housing along with childcare, rural broadband, that was that second tier of what I hear about, underneath education and healthcare. So I'm going to look at the entrepreneurs out there that build the homes, that tell me that a lot of regulation coming from DC has added maybe 10% to the cost of homes, well intended, but it even exacerbates it to make it more out of reach. A local entrepreneur that runs the Cook Medical Group that has elevated that to his mission. How do you get an affordable 3-bedroom home built on a slab of 1,700 square feet that actually could be a starter home, which means 185 to maybe 2.25. Well, that's been out of reach with inflation. He found a way to do it actually during COVID. Has actually done it in Spencer, French Lick or West Baden, and Bloomington. So it can be done. But businesses who benefit from the workforce are going to have to be part of the equation, just like they need to be part of the equation when it comes to workforce training. Don't expect government to do it all and then complain about the fact your taxes are going up. So I will take an entrepreneurial approach, make sure that our state government isn't doing things to make it harder. Look at permitting, all the things where contractors have to interface with our own state government. Keep the practical stuff in place, speed it up, but try to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit, the problem solvers. And what he found is if you could get local jurisdictions to help stub into utilities, it took enough cost out of that home to where you could do it at an affordable price. So maybe learn from what a brilliant entrepreneur did to tell us what can be done.
According to the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority Housing Dashboard, the homeownership rate for Black Hoosiers was 38% in 2022, compared to 75% for white Hoosiers. Black Hoosiers have been the only racial group to experience a decline in their homeownership rate since 2012, due, in part, to past discriminatory practices and policies. As governor, what steps would you take to increase homeownership opportunities, especially for Black Hoosiers?
Well, I would hope there's not a vestige of discrimination or bias left that would contribute to that. If that's the case, if it's out there, it's got to go. A lot of what I think on any of the groups that are struggling to get into home ownership, it's largely related to workforce development. There's 140,000 jobs out there that need a better skills-based K through 12 education. Finally, we're getting a diploma that recognizes it. And if we get that balance right for the high demand, high wage jobs, the highest paid employee from a company that's really gotten workforce down to an art is Toyota. It's not someone on the line, it's the repair person that gets the biggest wage. That's going to be similar to what middle management would get in a company. So much of eliminating that has to do with how do we get our educational system in a better place to where it's getting our kids guided into the high demand, high wage jobs, put parents in the driver's seat where they got choices along that way, but don't misguide kids into what now directs half of them towards a 4-year degree, only, or nearly about 50%, half of whom don't get a degree, and they've wasted time and money. I'm going to work hard on that. I think that is doable. That addresses a lot of the inequities, I think, that are at the entry level or where people want to get to first base.
So let's talk a little bit about childcare. The first 5 years of a child's life are critical for brain development of our young Hoosiers. Research shows that access to affordable, quality childcare can enable more people to work. To set the stage for Hoosier children's future educational success, how should families' access to high-quality care and learning opportunities be expanded?
So, I remember back 40-some years ago, Kimball's, a big company from Jasper, provided it. Then there, I think, were issues with, well, you didn't need it. There were enough enterprisers out there that, I remember when with 4 kids, taking them to maybe one place. That's pandemonium. That's not going to work. They probably entered into liability issues, and we got away from it. If we're going to tease more people back into the workforce, it's now real. I go back to visit our own school district about 6 to 9 months ago. They're providing childcare to get teachers and retain them. So we need, again, the entities that want workforce need to be willing to scramble to see how to do it. I don't think we want the state government to run it. We want to make sure that they've got a platform of regulations and guidelines that will make it easy. But I would say enterprising businesses that will be the beneficiaries of it need to get more involved in it. Businesses got to be careful. If they complain about taxes and too much government, but you still want it, you better start being innovative on your own account. That's the way I've run my business for 37 years before I got sworn in as senator. And that is something, even though 3 of my 4 kids are running it now, I think they're entertaining, and they'd want to make sure that they're not going to be fraught with complications that our own state would put in place, are being subject to, maybe a legal system that would be looking for ways to make that difficult.
As in the rest of the country, Hoosiers are experiencing the ever larger effects of a changing climate, including more extreme and frequent weather events. Multiple surveys have found that most Hoosiers, regardless of political party, support policies that help address climate change and do more to develop alternative energy sources. What policies do you think are needed to address climate change?
Well, something I did that was unexpected, and it was only 6 months after I got into the U.S. Senate. Senator from Delaware, Chris Coons, had been trying for 2 years to get a climate caucus started. A caucus means you have to have somebody from the other side. Well, when you're down to a freshman senator, that's getting desperate, number one, and that means everyone else said no. I didn't hesitate then. Get a few texts from back home, have you gone to the dark side, what are you doing? Well, on issues like climate or healthcare, or a lot of the things we as a party nationally choose not to get put it on the table. I say you're going to be on the menu politically, and you may not like the policy. Then we complain about it. So that has been an interesting discussion, that if you don't like the Green New Deal, you still know that something's afoot, well, what's your response going to be? That has changed so much from July or August of 19. It's been the most active caucus by far in the U.S. Senate, and it puts me in an excellent place to discuss it. In the last 2-3 months, we've had all the leaders on nuclear technology, which was taboo on the other side of the aisle. Well, they want lower greenhouse gases. You're not going to get it all with windmills and solar. That's intermittent, especially till we get battery technology to line up with the solar side. That is something I feel good that we as a state could lead on, maybe with a consortium of states, now that that is back on the table. There are other approaches like hydrogen. There's a lot of technology out there that's ready to disrupt it. If you're not in there in the conversation, again, you're not going to be crafting a solution. And I think states probably get more done there than the federal government, because remember, you need 60 senators for that. And that's going to be hard to corral in today's climate. But it's an important issue.
According to federal reporting, only 37% of all Indiana schools met or exceeded expectations during the 2022-2023 academic year. Recent state assessments also revealed that only 30% of students were proficient in math and English language arts. What should we do to improve equitable education outcomes for students across the state?
That's as appalling as the stat on infant and maternal mortality, especially when that's half of our state budget of $22 billion. So I'm a believer that you've got to have choice and competition when you're trying to do something better, especially if the status quo has not been giving you the results you're looking for. I think that's a combination of technology. It's a combination of, if you can put resources together, maybe starting the educational journey earlier, and that comes up as a discussion. And I think that's important. What we've got currently is not working, and that feeds into the workforce discussion we had. Not to mention, if you want to do something in higher education where that's required. So somehow we've got to find that sweet spot of resources. Teachers are probably underpaid. We probably put too much money in administration and buildings. All of that's got to change with the proper metrics to go along with it. Because the stats you just recited, I can tell you, a lot of our geopolitical competitors are not going to be sporting stats like that. So they've found a way to do it, and we'll need to look maybe broadly to find out what is working. I think it worked before many, many years ago. I guess you go back to the single-room schoolhouse, to where you were devoting more time and energy into the basics of education. Why it's not working now, when it seems like we'd have the resources, the technology to even make it easier, somewhere we're missing what that sweet spot is. And I think, again, that's probably crafted by entrepreneurial states. One state figures it out, shares a best practice with others. That's the kind of approach I'll take, because it's been elusive and it's still ending up with stats like you just recited.
Nearly 1 in 12 Hoosiers meet the criteria for having a substance use disorder. Access to early intervention and treatment services not only saves lives, but also reduces the economic impact of addiction on the individual and the community. What can your administration do to ensure those individuals have continued access to necessary recovery and treatment services?
So when it comes to addictions, mental health, many times they're, tied at the hip together. That cat's fully out of the bag through COVID, and I think our state has recognized that. I do see a lot of efforts county by county to try to address it. When it comes to students and young people having it, that's even worse than, I think, what happens once you're out of school. So it's all connected together. It's finally, I think, going to get attention and resources. And I do see a lot of local areas that are trying to find that solution. I'll try to see the best of what's happening in our own state and see what is working. But I do think it's on the radar officially as something that we can't ignore to the extent we have up at least through COVID.
Indianapolis has the 5th highest imprisonment rate in the nation for Black men born to low-income families. Researchers have found that racial disparities in the Indianapolis criminal justice system are a leading cause. What should be the top priority in addressing racial disparities in the Indiana justice system, and what will your administration do to implement policies to reduce them?
So when it comes to anything that would be a disparity, and again, earlier I said, anything that's got any component of race, bias, and discrimination, that's got to be rooted out. When it comes to the groups that seem to be disproportionately kind of dealing with those issues, we got to figure out, again, how we can change that from the grassroots up. But where it would be a case where it is just a practice that's occurring, that's even more shameful and will need to be remediated. How much attention's been paid to that, why that's occurring in Indianapolis as opposed to other places. It's its own jurisdiction, which I think at some point that if you got issues in any part of our state that seem to be a struggle, it happened in Gary, it happened in Muncie when we had to take over those school systems because they just weren't working. And when it comes to our own state capital, it's run as a separate political entity. You'd hope that the broader government would be interested in trying to find out a way to help, even if it's administered through a separate political division. But that, again, is something that you can't stick your head in the sand about. And I would try to find the root cause of it and see what the proper combination of remediation is.
So let's wrap up with a final question about young voter engagement. Indiana is historically among the bottom states in voter participation, particularly for young voters. Has your campaign engaged young voters during this election cycle, and what can be done to increase voting in our elections?
I've been lucky since I'm, I guess, not your cardboard cutout politician. Came from, I call it the real world, and got involved in politics later on. That's attracted a broad group of entrepreneurs, ethnicities, age levels, with a heavy emphasis on young people because they see something different. And I think to engage youth to vote is going to be similar in terms of how you engage youth to maybe be more interactive in their own decisions they need to make from the time they're thinking about it, especially by the time you're done with high school. To me, we're a state that you've got many ways to vote. You can do it early. You got about 12, 13 ways to ask for an absentee ballot. any party that's not, or that is afraid of engaging a broader array of people into the system probably needs to look at its own policies to see why that may not be the case. All I can say in my political campaigns, I've been blessed to where I've had a broad array of people that have been willing to be part of it. So I'll probably look there to see what you can do to parlay that into policy that hopefully would get some of the disturbingly low voter participation rates up to a higher level.
Great. Senator Mike Braun, thank you for joining us. We deeply appreciate it and wish you good luck in the rest of your campaign.
You're welcome, and it was my pleasure to be here.
Please welcome the Libertarian nominee for governor, Mr. Donald Rainwater. Mr. Rainwater, thank you for being here.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be able to do this.
Well, let's go ahead and jump right in, and let's first talk about confidence in institutions. During the last 3 years, the Gallup organization has reported a large decrease in the public's confidence in our most important federal government institutions. While Indiana state government may not face quite the same loss of confidence as federal institutions, it also is likely not immune to it. What do you think can be done to raise Hoosiers' confidence that our state government can effectively address their needs?
Well, I've seen and heard a lot of folks express their concern, and I believe that that is one of the foundational reasons why I'm running for governor in the first place. As an everyday average Hoosier, I am very concerned about the fact that my state government seems to be less interested in the safeguarding of individual rights for Hoosiers and more interested in courting large corporate entities to move here. And so I think that one of the first things that we have to do as a state government is refocus and really recommit ourselves to government of, by, and for the people. And in doing so, focusing on the individual rights of our citizens and putting our government's focus on developing the small business owner, the family farmer, an economy, allowing an economy to grow where the rising tide truly does lift all ships. Because today I think most average Hoosiers hear people say that the economy is doing well, but it doesn't look that way in their bank account or when they sit down to pay their bills at the kitchen table. So I think that is an important part of what we can do.
Economic research shows small and new businesses create most new jobs. In 2022, the Indiana Community Action Poverty Institute found low-wage jobs dominate in rural areas. Although not a universal solution, entrepreneurship can lead to more jobs, lower income inequality, and build wealthier communities. What policies or programs can we implement or support to help Hoosiers who want to start a business?
Well, again, I think the first thing that we have to do is shift our state government's focus away from providing incentives and tax breaks to large corporations from outside of Indiana and start focusing more on the individual, because an entrepreneur is an individual. A small business owner is an individual. Someone who purchases a franchise and starts a franchise is an individual. What we're doing today is we're bringing in a large quantity of these corporate jobs, and we're actually encouraging the workforce to leave our small business owners and go to these large corporate jobs. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I believe in August of 23, issued a report saying that for every 100 available jobs in the state of Indiana, we're about 23 workers short. And what we have to do is we've got to refocus on the small business owner. I believe, and I don't remember where the statistic came from, I apologize, but over the past decade, we've actually had a net loss in small businesses and franchisees. And so we really need to refocus on the individual and stop courting, if you will, the big corporate entities and focus on how do we encourage entrepreneurship. And one of the things I think we have to do in order to do that is we have to take a really good, hard look at professional licensing in the state of Indiana, in a lot of the regulations around creating certain types of small businesses, and make it easier for people. You know, a lot of times we talk about government trying to create an incentive, and I don't think we need to incentivize as much as we do get out of the way.
Evidence shows that technological innovation elevates wages and incomes and our overall standard of living. Indiana has a large manufacturing industry that employs about 20% of our state's workforce, but innovation and technological advancement in manufacturing is lagging, particularly in rural areas. What can we do to increase opportunities for Hoosiers to work with artificial intelligence and in tech-intensive advanced manufacturing?
Well, as a software engineer for the past 25 years, I can personally attest to the fact that technology and innovation creates a lot of opportunity. It has created a lot of opportunity for me. One of the things that I believe that most economists agree on is that jobs don't bring people, people bring jobs. So, as we just talked about, when you have a worker shortage of about 20 to 25% in the state of Indiana, the issue isn't bringing jobs to rural areas. It's bringing people that are ready to do those jobs. And one of the things that I've learned over the past 25 years is you don't have to have a college degree to get the training to take advantage of the innovation that is available today. And so one of the things that we have to do is we have to do a better job of informing our citizens of all the different avenues of gaining that new skill, whether it be Ivy Tech or whether it be just certification courses and getting certifications and getting some on-the-job training. And as we get a workforce that is well-informed as to the opportunities, and then a workforce that is getting that training, and here again, it doesn't take a 4-year degree or a master's degree or a PhD. What it could be is just a 6-week course and a certification exam to get your project management professional certification or some other certification that gives you that foot in the door. Then those jobs will start coming to the areas where those people are. And I think that that's one of the things that we have to kind of, here again, refocus on. We're so focused on bringing jobs that we don't focus on how to encourage new residents to Indiana. And I think that's something we need to focus on.
Indiana's maternal and infant mortality rate has exceeded the national average since at least the 1990s. For every 1,000 births in 2022, 7 infants died before their first birthday, putting Indiana at the 7th highest position for infant mortality in the nation. Rural Hoosiers and Hoosiers of color, in particular, experience inadequate maternal and infant health care due to a lack of physicians, hospitals, and specialty services. How can we improve Indiana's maternal and infant health outcomes while also reducing racial and geographic disparities?
Well, this is an issue that was a question that was asked 4 years ago. And so the first thing that we have to realize is, here again, our state government doesn't seem to be addressing this issue. And one of the reasons that I think that is because healthcare is a complex issue. Part of the problem that we have, and I'm going to go back to our professional licensing, we have a shortage of midwives in Indiana, and we need more midwives because in many of these areas, whether it be an urban area or a rural area, our large corporate healthcare facilities and organizations, for whatever reason, don't deem it profitable to provide health care in these areas. You unfortunately find that doctors cluster together now, many times because health insurance costs and the overhead involved in a provider dealing with the insurance company makes it difficult for them to be independent. They have to kind of network together in order to split the cost of the overhead involved. And so I think there are a couple of things that we need to do right away. One is get nurse practitioners, midwives, make it easier to get into that field. Here again, a lot of that is education. Post-secondary education is way too expensive. We need to figure out how to make the educational opportunities more affordable for people. That's a complex issue that we can't solve sitting right here, unfortunately. But there are things that we can do. The professional licensing, making it easier to maintain a professional license in the areas of healthcare, making it easier for what I will refer to as the old country doctor, right? The doctor who would actually come to you. We don't have that today. We've got to figure out how to make it financially viable for healthcare professionals to be able to provide the type of services. I think we're starting to see that with direct primary care. I think if you look at being able to go to a Kroger or a Walmart to get care from a clinic, but here again, in a lot of the areas we're talking about, there are no Krogers, right? Because your healthcare desert is also a food desert. And there's an issue there we've got to figure out. And here again, it's not, we can't just keep taxing people over and over and over, more and more and more, and then saying we're going to take this money and give it to somebody to go do this, because that won't work. That's not sustainable. But we've got to start addressing these problems where they are. And the reality is we don't have enough people who are able to provide health care in an affordable way to these particular groups of people, whether they be urban or rural. And we've got to get together and focus on how to do that and stop focusing on how we create regulations that increase the monopolies of the large healthcare corporations we have today. And there's nothing wrong with the large healthcare corporations we have today, but we also have to have, if you will, the mom and pop, the small business, the entrepreneurial healthcare provider that can afford to meet the regulatory burdens and be able to provide what people need.
So let's turn to housing. Indiana has a deficit of nearly 140,000 affordable and available rental homes, with only 34 units available for every 100 of the lowest income households, the second lowest rate in the Midwest. Additionally, in the last year alone, Indiana had nearly 71,000 eviction filings, nearly 1 in 10 Hoosier renter households. What investments are needed, and as governor, what strategies would you employ to make housing more affordable in our state?
You know, I read, I think it was yesterday morning, that it is now in some parts of the state cheaper to buy a house than it is to rent one. And I'm going to say we have to start with property taxes, because real estate investors are not going to pay rising property taxes without passing that cost on to their renter. And the reality is as property tax assessments keep going up so that the government can collect, whether it be local government or county government, they want to collect property taxes so they can go do a lot of these vanity projects that don't necessarily help the individual citizen. And the reality is that those property taxes keep going up. That affects renters, in my opinion, probably more harshly than it does a homeowner. And homeowners, we all know how harshly it affects us, right? And when you look at your property taxes, whether here again you're a homeowner or an investor, being escrowed into your mortgage, if you have your rental property on a mortgage, then that represents $100, $200, $300, maybe even $400 a month. And so if you're passing that on to a renter, that's hard to handle. And so, in my opinion, the first thing we need to do is address property taxes and get that under control. And not just for the homeowner, not just for senior citizens or veterans, and I'm a veteran, but for everybody. Every Hoosier homeowner, every Hoosier real estate owner who has renters, we need to address this for everybody because it affects everybody. And we also need to look really, really hard at why we have the continually rising housing costs that we have. This is an element of inflation. And inflation, here again, most economists will say in one form or another, they'll say that the basic cause of inflation is government spending money we don't really have. And whether it's the federal government, the state government, your county government, your local government, this idea that it's better for government to spend money than it is for you and me to spend money is backward. So we've really got to, here again, refocus on what's right and what's best for the economy, not just what's right and what's best for a group of politicians' donors.
According to the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority Housing Dashboard, the homeownership rate for Black Hoosiers was 38% in 2022, compared to 75% for white Hoosiers. Black Hoosiers have been the only racial group to experience a decline in their homeownership rate since 2012, due, in part, to past discriminatory practices and policies. As governor, what steps would you take to increase homeownership opportunities, especially for Black Hoosiers?
Well, I don't know if the governor can do a lot to fix that problem other than, here again, to call out what I think is an underlying cause of the problem. Most of the areas where Black Hoosiers are affected by this are areas where our local county and state government have ignored the area. They're so busy trying to build the donut counties, for example, that we're ignoring probably about 90% of the state of Indiana, including most of Indianapolis. And it's because that's not where they want to spend the money. It's a shame, because the original purpose of the tax increment financing district and the redevelopment, it's even in the name, redevelopment commission. It's not a new development commission. It's supposed to be a redevelopment commission. And these tools were supposed to be tools designed to help reinvigorate areas that were economically hurting. And so what we've done is we've seen that over the past 20 to 30 years, tools that were originally designed to help these very areas and to increase the economic growth in these areas. Here again, as the economy grows, folks are then able to hopefully make more money, save more money. And when you can save more money, you can buy a house. But we don't see that. What we see is these property taxes and other taxes being spent on areas that are already pretty affluent. And so here again, I think we need to refocus what the purpose of tax increment financing and redevelopment commissions. And if we're not going to spend it the way it was intended, we need to do away with it and give people their money back.
So let's talk a little bit about childcare. The first 5 years of a child's life are critical for brain development of our young Hoosiers. Research shows that access to affordable, quality childcare can enable more people to work. To set the stage for Hoosier children's future educational success, how should families' access to high-quality care and learning opportunities be expanded?
Well, that's a subject that concerns me, because one of the things that I hear from both the Republicans and the Democrats is that they want to expand universal pre-K. And I think the assumption is, well, we need to provide this so more people can work. Well, not everybody wants to work. Some folks would like to stay home and actively take care of the development of those first 5 years of a child's life, not hand it over to the state of Indiana, because unfortunately, in my opinion, and what I've heard from, here again, both of my opponents, is that they want to have more control over how your children are taught from not just kindergarten through 12th grade, but now from birth through 5 years old. I'm going to be very honest. That concerns me. That's not really the kind of thing, to me, in a free society that we want to get in the habit of doing. So I think here again, what we need to do is, if we're going to focus on how to make childcare affordable, we need to first of all look at what regulations we have created and what hoops childcare providers are required by state government to jump through in order to be a childcare provider. It's very important that we make sure that we have some oversight to ensure that childcare providers are providing good quality childcare, that they're not neglecting or abusing children, and I understand that. But here again, we as a state government have created a habit of creating regulations that favor some and are really barriers to entry for others. And this is something that we have to analyze and do away with, because creating a barrier to entry so that there's less competition drives up prices. If we create more competition and we allow people to get into the, here again, professional licensing and all of the things that go along with childcare providers, I think then we can see a lowering of cost and making it more affordable for people. Because here again, the regulations, or over-regulation, if you will, is what drives up the cost. And government can't fix that because government is causing that. Government needs to remove some of those regulations.
As in the rest of the country, Hoosiers are experiencing the ever larger effects of a changing climate, including more extreme and frequent weather events. Multiple surveys have found that most Hoosiers, regardless of political party, support policies that help address climate change and do more to develop alternative energy sources. What policies do you think are needed to address climate change?
Well, here again, from a scientific standpoint, I'm not an expert on climate change, obviously. But I believe that whatever we are contributing to it, we need as a state to look at opportunities to make more sustainable energy choices. Now, being a Navy veteran, I would like to see us do more research and spend a little more effort on the idea of nuclear energy. I believe there are about 669 nuclear power plants worldwide, and there have only been a very small, like 32 incidents of people being injured or killed in relationship to nuclear energy. So a lot of the concerns that people might have about safety, I think we can do a better job of letting folks know that this isn't the 1980s. I'll say that we've got nuclear submarines and nuclear aircraft carriers working safely all over the world in our Navy. And so I think that is an energy source that we should be looking at really, really strongly to help to reduce some of those climate issues.
According to federal reporting, only 37% of all Indiana schools met or exceeded expectations during the 2022-2023 academic year. Recent state assessments also revealed that only 30% of students were proficient in math and English language arts. What should we do to improve equitable education outcomes for students across the state?
I'll try to keep this brief. We need to do away with state standardized testing. We need to let our teachers teach. We need to decentralize education in the state of Indiana and flatten our bureaucracy. And by that I mean we need fewer administrators, fewer layers of bureaucrats in education, and more teachers and teachers' aides in the classroom teaching, as when I was a kid, they called it reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? The 3 R's. And that's what we need to focus on. And we've gotten so far away from that. Education is a political football in this state, and we need to do a Tom Brady and take the air out of that political football and get back to teaching kids.
Nearly 1 in 12 Hoosiers meet the criteria for having a substance use disorder. Access to early intervention and treatment services not only saves lives, but also reduces the economic impact of addiction on the individual and the community. What can your administration do to ensure those individuals have continued access to necessary recovery and treatment services?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is recognize that addiction is not a crime, and it should not be treated as a crime. Under a Rainwater administration, I would seek, first of all, to ask the General Assembly to decriminalize and legalize cannabis. I would expunge the records of anyone who had been convicted of a nonviolent cannabis-related offense, people who are addicted to alcohol, to other prescription narcotics, non-prescription narcotics. First of all, we have to recognize these are not crimes. It is not a crime. It is a medical condition, and we need to be able to encourage people to say, hey, I have a problem, I need help, and not be concerned that they're going to be incarcerated because they have an addiction issue.
Indianapolis has the 5th highest imprisonment rate in the nation for black men born to low-income families. Researchers have found that racial disparities in the Indianapolis criminal justice system are a leading cause. What should be the top priority in addressing racial disparities in the Indiana justice system, and what will your administration do to implement policies to reduce them?
Well, again, I think that, we've talked about a couple of these things that are causal to this. One is how we treat people who use cannabis. Two is the fact that because our state government is focused on spending money in places where they don't need to be spending money, we're not giving people much hope in these areas, especially in the urban areas that we've kind of turned our back on. And we're not we're not creating an environment where those economies can be reborn. And one of the things I think, we talk about violence in our cities. And I think that once again, that is a symptom of people who have no hope. And they have no hope because their government has turned their back on them. And because they feel like the government takes and takes and takes, the government is constantly there to try to incarcerate them, and they have no way out. And so we have to refocus our government on reducing government's influence on creating these situations. Because here again, Reagan said two things that I think are really, really poignant today. One is, here again, government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. And the other was that the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Because most often, they're not. And we've got to change that.
Indiana is historically among the bottom states in voter participation, particularly for young voters. Has your campaign engaged young voters during this election cycle? And what can be done to increase voting in our elections?
And I'm going to answer that by saying that young voters have engaged my campaign. I have seen a large number of young people come to me, whether it be at a county fair or somewhere else where I'm meeting voters, and young people, 18, 19, 20, will come up to me and they'll either say, I wasn't old enough to vote for you in 2020, but I'm voting for you this time. And it's because they'll tell you that the Republicans and the Democrats, they've listened to them spout stuff and nothing changes. And they believe that maybe there's an opportunity for change. And they see that in our campaign. And I think that that's important. And I think that that's an opportunity for the new voters to make an impact.
Mr. Donald Rainwater, Libertarian nominee for governor, thank you very much. We appreciate your participation.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity.
And certainly good luck in the rest of your campaign.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for these important discussions with the candidates for Indiana's governor. One of them will be elected to lead our state for the next 4 years, and it is my hope that these conversations will help inform your decision this November. To the candidates, Dr. McCormick, Senator Braun, and Mr. Rainwater, we wish you the best of luck and thank you for joining us. A special thanks to the Heron School of Art and Design at IU Indianapolis, and especially the school's dean, Greg Hall, for their gracious accommodations and support. A special thanks also goes to the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs, whose students, faculty, staff, and alumni continue to make this forum an important event during the fall gubernatorial campaign cycle. And to the incredibly hardworking staff of the IU Public Policy Institute and our O'Neill Marketing and Communications team. You can learn more about the policy briefs used to inform our discussions at policyinstitute.iu.edu. If you have not registered to vote, the deadline to do so in Indiana is Monday, October 7th. Election day is Tuesday, November 5th. No matter for whom you cast your ballot, please exercise your right to vote. Once again, thank you for joining us.